Next speaker is Peter Nordquist. He is a RIST member since 1986, and he is specializing in radio frequency engineering. And his title, speech title is Regarding the Spirit World and Physical World and in Support of the True Mother, Comments from True Father.
Guten Tag, I'm glad to be here. You have to have faith that God guided me in picking the comments that I'm about to make because they're from Father. And as we know, half of every father's speech is about the spirit world. And every time we're talking about spiritual growth or Cain and Abel or God even, that's actually also about the spirit world. So anyway, here we go. I hope you find this interesting. All right. These are two quotes. I'm just going to read them from the Red Book of Speeches that Father picked out in prison. So at RIST, morning service at the Giessen building, Dr. Park had us sit around and read through Divine Principle, and then read the Red Book of Speeches. And when we were finished, we would go back to Divine Principle. And when we were finished, we'd go back to the Red Book of Speeches. And we would just read through them over and over again. And so this Red Book of Speeches is one of the benefits of Father going to prison in Danbury, that he picked out these speeches as his core message and had them sent to supposedly 250,000 ministers in America or around the world. Anyway, these are two quotes from that book. One is on page 80, The Way of Restoration, April 1972, Paris, France. Father alone is not enough. You must go through both of the true parents. However important Father may be, you must also pass through True Mother. Page 392, God's preparation for our church in the early days. The ultimate goal of God is to find one perfected Adam. But that Adam cannot come into being unless an Eve is found through whom he can be perfected. In other words, even though Adam might be appointed by God, he could never entirely fulfill his responsibility alone. In the Garden of Eden, Eve was responsible for initiating the fall of man. Therefore, unless an Eve can be found who can indemnify the fall in the Garden of Eden, Adam would have no way to assume the supreme position of perfection. Eve also had no way to reach perfection without Adam. In order to reach her perfection, Eve must either create Adam, meet Adam, or give birth to Adam. So every one of us as blessed couples, we are each other's messiahs. And that's a core teaching from way back when. Okay, so then the second source in support of True Mother comes from a speech called The Sound of the Bell of the Mind. So that's this speech, January 28th, 1979. The Sound of the Bell of the Mind. Okay, so Jesus came as the only begotten Son to restore God's only daughter and make God's only begotten family, nation, and world. So there's this big discussion recently, what is the begotten Son, and how is it that True Mother is talking about the begotten daughter? Okay, well, in this speech, Father explains all about it, 1979. And so when Jesus came and pronounced himself as God's only begotten Son, it moved God as no other sound did before. In Jesus' mind, being God's Son was such an absolute matter that nothing could shake it. So Father's talking about Jesus here, but we can imagine that this is also true about True Father and True Mother. True Mother's conviction that she is God's only begotten daughter cannot be shaken. Even if his body was chopped apart piece by piece, he would still have had the conviction that he was the only begotten Son of God. And nothing could change that in his mind. In that absolute commitment, Jesus knew he could not be defeated by anyone. Jesus reached the very center of love in the heart of God, and he was always ready to receive any kind of instruction from God. No other saint has ever so closely embodied that goal. When he called himself the only begotten Son of God, so what does only begotten mean? Okay, Father explains what he thinks it means. When he called himself the only begotten Son of God, he meant that he and God were the only true existence, and that he meant to change the rest of the world to become true as well. The first thing he intended to recreate was God's daughter. That sound of Jesus saying, "I'm the only begotten Son," that sound pierced the very mind and heart of God, and they resounded and rang together. That sound shook God and made him feel good because it was the sound of love. So for True Mother, same thing. God is shaken to the core because this is the sound of love. God wants to be melted by love to the degree that he forgets himself and his dignity as God and can become totally like a child. Will anybody object that God shouldn't act like that? In love, everything will be melted into one. Okay, so finally from this speech, last quote. Because God sees his own image in his first Son, and through him can manifest his image to the entire world, you know how critical that person is. What should that son do? Does God need only a son? God knew ahead of time that he needed a pair, which would include a daughter. We have to talk about God's daughter, especially here in America. God will be more accepted in this country when we talk about his only begotten daughter as well. So, all of this controversy about the only begotten daughter, it shouldn't be any controversy at all, because Father already explained it a long time ago. Now, how is it that I happen to notice, this is the last little section of my 10 minutes or so, and how is it that I noticed this speech? So I noticed this speech a couple of years ago, and I put a certain quote on the internet, and then people read it, and they say, "Oh, look at all this other stuff about all God's only begotten daughter." And then we realized this is a really important speech to explain to people in the world what True Mother is doing and why she's doing it. And for sure, she's inspired by God and by True Father. As soon as Father got to the spirit world, he probably said, "True Mother, start talking about what I told you to talk about," but nobody ever did. And no, they're not going to unless you do it first. That kind of thing. But anyway, how did I notice this? It happened because of my grandfather. My grandfather from Sweden was my bridge to join the church, according to Lady Dr. Kim. He died, went to the spirit world, joined the church in the spirit world, and then he came and got me. And so he had a bell collection. And he had a bell collection. And my cousin James interviewed my grandfather in the 1960s on audio tape. And so recently he put it on the internet. So I was listening to my grandfather explain in English the inscription on the bell in Swedish. And on this particular bell, it said, "When you hear this bell ringing at Christmas time, remember the message of salvation." So I'm standing on my grandfather's Christian foundation, who remembered the message of salvation. And therefore, I thought, let me read this speech. And it turns out this is part of the modern message of foundation, message of salvation, rather. Okay, I think that's it. Questions?
Thank you very much. All right. For the benefit of time, please catch Peter or Andy during the break, right? So we'll have a shorter but 10 minutes break with cake and coffee, and then so we'll start at the latest 3:50. 3:55 or 4 o'clock. Okay. At 4 o'clock, please be here, absolutely. Thank you.